a single cell organism can completely take control of our behavior. The microbiome is the puppet master, and we are merely the puppet. All addictive behavior is actually driven by the microbiome. Once you understand that these guys are pulling the strings, that actually gives you hope that if we manipulate them by changing our foods, by introducing bacteria that are good guys rather than bad guys, driving the bad guys out by literally starving them to death, then you can change some of what we would assume were horrible psychological issues. Depression and anxiety is directly related to dysbiotic microbiome.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Longevity and Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Claudia van Berzelaga, here to bring you the latest insights and learnings to improve your health, live a longer and happier life in the meantime, too. Before we dig in, I just want to take a moment to express my deepest gratitude for each and every one of you. Your unwavering loyalty and dedication mean the world to me. Thank you for tuning in to the episodes, for sharing your feedback, for being part of this amazing tribe and wanting to improve your life and your health for longer. Please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel or our Apple Podcasts and Spotify, wherever you check out this episode. We'd love to hear from you. It also enables me to bring you more free content from amazing speakers. So having your support in that way would be hugely grateful. Again, so grateful for you as this community and tribe keep growing and growing around the world. Thank you. My guest today is Dr. Stephen Gundry, a visionary in human nutrition and health. With over 4 decades of medical experience, including pioneering work in cardiac surgery, Dr. Gundry now guides individuals towards vibrant health and longevity through the power of nutrition. As director and founder of the International Heart and Lung Institute and the Center for Restorative Medicine, Dr. Stephen Gundry's mission is to empower people through simple dietary changes. Dr. Gundry's insights challenge conventional wisdom, offering new hope for optimal health. Please enjoy. Welcome to the Longevity and Lifestyle Podcast, Dr. Stephen Gundry. Such a pleasure to have you on. And I'd love to start with an important topic, the gut microbiome. And as listeners to the podcast will know, but it's still so important to really understand the importance of the gut microbiome. Can you expand on that for people perhaps new to the topic?
Sure. Let me just start with saying that 2,500 years ago, the father of medicine, Hippocrates, said that all disease begins in the gut. Mm-hmm. And I've been spending 25 years now trying to figure out how he knew that. And
good question.
And he was right. And with every passing year, particularly with the completion of the Human Microbiome Project, which completed in 2017, mm-hmm. we were able to realize that there are at least 100 trillion bacteria alone mm-hmm. in our gut. Now, the gut technically also includes the mouth, the nose, the swallowing tube, stomach, all the way down to your rear end. Mm-hmm. We could further amplify that. I like to call it rather than the microbiome, the holobiome. And I've claimed that in other books. And that should include what we now know is that these bacteria not only live in our gut, but they live in, obviously, our lungs. They live in any organ that has an outside entrance. So, for instance, we now know that there's a breast microbiome. We know there's a vaginal microbiome. Mm-hmm. We know now that there's a placental microbiome. There's even, now we know that the amniotic fluid, which we swore was sterile, has its own microbiome. Mm-hmm. And paper last week suggested that men with infertility issues have a semen microbiome
Mm.
that produces much higher levels of acid, which
Mhm.
immobilize sperm.
Mhm.
And that, if you have an infertility issue, we should look probably no further than your semen microbiome. So
Mhm.
we also have a microbiome on our skin. We have a microbiome cloud around us, very much like the Peanuts cartoon character of, I think it was, forgotten the little kid's name, but he had a cloud of
Charlie
things
Brown?
around
No,
him.
that's not the
No, that was the other one.
another one.
And it wasn't Linus, it was another little kid. Anyhow,
Okay.
one kind of fun thing is there's suggestion that the idea of personal space,
Mhm.
that you and I will only get just so close to each other,
Mhm.
is that our microbiome bumps into your microbiome and we check each other out. In fact, there's actually one paper that suggests that the reason kissing seems to be a universal
Mhm.
human tendency is we are having our microbiome decide whether they are compatible with your microbiome.
So we're all run by
And
bacteria, essentially.
we are run by bacteria. And I'm glad you said that
Mhm.
because I made kind of that bold claim in my current book, Gut Check. And I'm writing my next book, expanding on that. Sorry, everything that happens to us happens because of a change in our microbiome. And
Mhm.
the longer we find out what these guys do and the control they exert on all aspects of us, including how we think, how we eat, our longevity, our health span, the more it all comes down to these guys. And
Mhm.
Hippocrates was right. Um, and it's not voodoo. It's yeah.
Science.
Sorry.
So one question before we dig in further with the microbiome. Have you figured out how Hippocrates knew that it's all in the gut? Any idea?
No, I don't. I think and it's interesting. I have one of my patients is a Sanskrit scholar, a
Oh.
Buddhist scholar,
Mhm.
and he's gotten really into this. And recently, he came to me. He says, I read Sanskrit. I've looked at the Buddha's teaching, and one of the things that might surprise you, Buddha and Hippocrates were contemporaries, obviously
Mhm.
separated,
Yeah.
and there's no evidence that they knew each other. But
Mhm.
um, he said he translated from Sanskrit that enlightenment begins in the intestines. And
Ooh.
you go, whoa, really? How do these guys know this stuff?
Uh-huh.
Maybe their gut bacteria were talking to them, and maybe they had a better radio
Telepathic.
receiver than
Exactly.
in most of us. Yeah, but yeah,
Wow.
with each passing day, more and more of this becomes evident. So, I mean, literally with each passing day.
So can you share with my audience, people, babies are born and they've already been exposed to the microbiome from the placenta. And as we go through life, especially life nowadays, where there's typically more harm than good from radiation and exposure chemicals, etc., what's all in the environment, and that good bacteria, one would think, is deteriorating. So what are some things that people should be aware of? What are some of the modalities that you recommend in order to maintain slash repair this microbiome? Obviously, it will depend, I assume, on which microbiome we're referring to. But can you share some strategies?
Yeah, that's one of the things we've now uncovered. Particularly, for instance, let's take autism for example.
Hmm.
Um, the the autistic brain has gotten that way primarily because of a miscommunication between the fetal microbiome and
Hmm.
the developing neurons in the brain. And there's sadly evidence that the placental microbiome and even the amniotic fluid microbiome should be educating even in fetal life, neural development, not only neurodevelopment, but immune system development. And it looks like that these changes occur literally before mom is aware of it. Now, this is not throwing a guilt ball at anybody. Mom didn't know that this was going on. I was a children's heart surgeon, a congenital heart surgeon, and mom didn't know that there might be a virus that was infecting her child that caused a hole in the heart to develop. And so nobody's throwing a guilt ball at anybody, but we now know, we know that autism was incredibly rare, even 50 years ago, and it's a very modern phenomenon. And 1 of 10 kids, maybe more, are in the autism spectrum disorder. So it's huge. So you have to go, what in the world happened? So long story short, first of all, we overuse antibiotics. I think most people are aware of that, and yet it happens continuously. Most of the things we come down with, a runny nose, a scratchy throat, whatever, aches and pains, are viruses. And sorry, we don't have antibiotics against viruses. We have antivirals, but and yet not a day passes that somebody is given an antibiotic for their scratchy throat or their runny nose.
Scary, yeah.
Recently, I take care of a very famous actress that was pregnant, and she came down with the sniffles in her 3rd trimester. And her obstetrician gave her a round of antibiotics. And I'm going, what the heck?
Is this possible? I mean,
I couldn't believe.
I just.
Well, and for instance, just on the same thing, we know that normally we get a wonderful dose of the microbiome from our mother when we come out the birth canal. I told Maria Shriver that her mother took a crap on her, and which is true. Thank you, Mom. And the mother inoculates us with her set of bacteria. And as I've talked before, our mitochondria, which are the energy-producing organelles, are actually ancient engulfed bacteria, and we only inherit the DNA to make mitochondria from our mother. And just to talk about Hippocrates, I think it's not without reason that the reason the mother gives us our microbiome through the birth canal is the mother gave us our mitochondria, which are ancient bacteria. And these two guys talk to each other. And they're kind of like the sisterhood. And sisters, I have 2 daughters and constantly talk. And so we've actually learned the language of this crosstalk. So number 1, you don't want to screw that up with antibiotics. Number 2, we know that kids who are born with cesarean section don't get that set of microbes. And if you look at their microbiome in their gut, it's actually all skin flora that and they have skin flora for at least 6 months before they begin to acquire more bacteria. And speaking of malpractice, what should happen with cesarean sections, and don't get me wrong, cesarean sections can be life-saving for both the mother and the baby. So I'm not against C-sections. But we should be taking a swab, put it in the vagina of the mother, and immediately after the baby is born, we should be swabbing the mouth and the nose and the skin of the baby with this vaginal swab. And just 2 years ago, I had an obstetrician. I told the mother, now make sure, because it was a scheduled C-section, make sure that he does that. And he said, that's ridiculous. That's voodoo. That's hocus pocus. And I had to write a prescription for him to
Ser-
do that.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's
Well
like,
done. Well done for doing it.
yeah, but I mean, sadly, the average practicing physician is about 20 years behind current research. How
And
do I know that?
yeah.
I was lucky to be involved in an organization in the United States called the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, which was founded by Don Berman from Boston. And he was a academic pediatrician who
Mhm.
noticed that practicing pediatricians seemed to be about 20 years behind current research.
Mhm.
And so he founded an organization where we were all invited from various fields to look into current knowledge and where the current practice was. And I was chosen in cardiology and cardiac surgery. And he was absolutely right.
Mhm.
When we went around, even to academic institutions, and looked at the level of practice,
Mhm.
it was about 20 years behind current knowledge. And
Is it
now,
because of
why
the
is it?
lack of time? If I'm into it, like,
A
is it
lot of it is a lack.
they
Yeah,
don't have
the
time?
average,
Mhm.
GP over in England and the average family medicine
Mhm.
doctor here in the United States has about 8 minutes per
Mhm.
patient,
Yeah.
and that 8 minutes is basically spent renewing prescriptions and
For antibiotics.
for antibiotics. Uh, and they really, sadly, don't have the time and
Mhm.
sometimes the interest
Mhm.
to catch up. And again, so much of this area, if you had asked me, I've been doing this part of my life for 25 years now, and if you had asked me 20 years ago
Mhm.
what I thought about leaky gut, I probably would have told you it was pseudoscience.
Mhm. Mhm.
But thanks to work by Alessio Fasano, who's now at Harvard, a pediatric gastroenterologist, we
Mhm.
know, number one, it's science,
Mhm.
it's real, intestinal permeability is real,
Mhm.
and we can measure it. We can measure the degree of leaky gut.
Mhm.
And in my work, we can watch it go away. We can watch it repair,
Mhm.
which is pretty exciting.
Yes.
That's why I do it.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I mean, we I would have thought it was pseudoscience, and you were mentioning off camera, Dr. Dale Bredesen and I have become good friends through the years, and we actually talk all the time. And
Mhm.
it continues to amaze us that much of the work that he does and I do, and
Mhm.
David Perlmutter, just to drop
Mhm.
another name,
Mhm.
uh, is looked on as fanciful, magical thinking,
Yeah.
and and quackery.
Mhm.
And it's like, oh my gosh, come on, read the literature, folks.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got 633 references in Gut Check,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
I didn't make this stuff up.
No. And that's the sad truth of it, is the default is doubt and criticism and quackery and shaming versus saying, interesting perspective, let me also spend time and look at the research as well and dig into it and see what's there. And then obviously you're working with patients, so you have real life testimonials of actually people whose lives you've helped and changed as well, right?
Yeah, I see patients 6 days a week. After I get
Oh wow.
off with you this morning, I'll see my first patient. And I see patients on Saturdays and Sundays,
Wow.
uh, really.
Wow.
And I don't need to, but in fact, I do need to, because number one, I get to see what I would have considered miracles happen every day.
Mm.
But I learn a great deal
Hmm.
from my patients. And
Hmm.
let me give you an example. Number of years ago, probably 20 years ago,
Hmm.
we measure vitamin D levels on all of our patients every 3 months.
Hmm.
And I saw two elderly people, couple, who were in their late 70s,
Hmm.
first time, and their vitamin D levels were around 270 nanograms per milliliter. To put some perspective, most physicians are taught that 60 or 80 nanograms per milliliter is the upper limit of normal. If you go above 80, it's toxic, and it's vitamin D toxicity.
Mm-hmm.
And so here are these two fairly healthy looking people sitting opposite me who have vitamin D levels of 276. And first of all, I'm looking at them and I'm going, why aren't they dead? Number one. And I go, you have very high vitamin D levels. They said, oh yeah, we take a lot of vitamin D. I said, well, why do you do that? And they said, oh, well, it's a longevity vitamin. And I'm going, what? And so vitamin D is claimed if you have too much, it can cause kidney stones, it can cause kidney failure. It can cause numbness in fingers and toes. And I'm going, any kidney stones? No, why? And I'm looking at their kidney results and they're perfectly normal. Uh-huh. Any numbness fingers? No, why? I said, well, you ought to be dead. And they said, well, why do you say that? And I said, because you have toxic levels. And they said, who says? And I was trained that. They said, you don't read the literature, do you? And I'm going, well, I like to think I really do read literature. Yeah. I said, but no, I haven't read about vitamin D. They said, well, Sonny, why don't you catch up? And so I read the literature and lo and behold, they're right. And it's like, wow, thank you for teaching me this.
Yeah.
And yet to this day, I still see patients, about 80% of my patients are autoimmune patients, whose rheumatologists tell them to, oh my gosh, your vitamin D level is toxic. Dr. Gundry is trying to kill you. Or I have a cancer practice and their oncologists will say, oh my gosh, your vitamin D level is too high. He's trying to kill you. And yet the University of California, San Diego, which has one of the biggest vitamin D research units in the United States, says that the average American should be taking 9,600 international units of vitamin D3 a day.
I'm on 5,000.
Yeah, and I take 10. And they have never seen vitamin D toxicity up to 40,000 units a day.
Wow. Up to 40,000.
40,000. Wow. I have some of my autoimmune patients on 45,000 international units a day.
Wow.
For a while.
So explain, would you agree with their statement that it's a longevity drug?
Oh, absolutely. I wrote about this in The Longevity Paradox. It turns out that people who have the highest vitamin D levels live the longest and have the best health span. And it gets back to the gut. It all gets back to the gut. It turns out that we have the lining of the gut is at least the size of a tennis court. There's a physician in the UK who, Dr. Keith Scott Mumby, thinks it's 2 tennis courts. Great. So that tennis court is only 1 cell thick, and it is the only thing that separates our gut microbiome and everything we swallow from the rest of us. And if you look at experimental animals, we know that aging and ultimately death is predicated on this 1 cell thick wall beginning to break down and become porous. And as that wall breaks down, aging and death ensues. In fact, it's incredibly predictable. It's like the hordes at the gate. And if that wall is intact, then aging does not occur. And so what's interesting is we have a lot of stem cells in this wall because this wall is constantly being changed over. It's constantly being attacked. And so we have this nice collection of stem cells to replace the damaged pieces of the wall. What's fascinating is these stem cells are incredibly sensitive to vitamin D. And if vitamin D is low, even though there's holes in the wall, the stem cells just kind of sit there and twiddle their thumbs and go, what do you want me to do about it? when you do vitamin D, literally pushes these stem cells to differentiate and repair the holes.
Wow.
And that's one of the things that struck me early on in my autoimmune practice, is that all these people who walked in with autoimmune diseases had very low vitamin Ds. And as we got their vitamin Ds up and up and up, we could measure the holes in the wall repairing. So,
Amazing.
and so, yeah, it's amazing. Vitamin D is a longevity drug. And I learned that from 2 elderly patients. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
We can learn from everyone. So we were discussing before, and I'd love to continue the conversation with, I think also for people listening, wondering, there's different, gut microbiome tests. Some physicians don't even offer gut microbiome tests. Some are like, do I even need to do the test? Should I just start healing myself? Where should people start if they think that, or they know that their gut microbiome is a bit off? Like what should be the first step, would you recommend?
Well, I'm one of those physicians who thinks that a gut microbiome test is a waste of money. The reason for that is it is merely a snapshot of your gut microbiome. And your gut microbiome changes constantly based on the food you eat, among other things. And so if you wanted a Polaroid picture of your gut microbiome that day, go ahead and do it. I've had the pleasure of getting to know some gut microbiome researchers at University of California, San Diego, who are mitochondrial experts, and they laugh their heads off that anybody would actually get a gut microbiome test because it's so useless. Now, having said that, I have a number of patients who walk through the door with their gut microbiome test. And there have been innumerable gut microbiome tests looking at changing the gut microbiome. And I can say, and I've written about this, that most people have a real lack of species of bacteria that make short chain fatty acids. These are the ultimate short chain fatty acid is called butyrate, and butyrate is generated by butyrate producing bacteria, and there are a number of them. I write about them in the book. And if you look at people with issues, one of the things that's striking for most of these people is they lack butyrate producing bacteria. Interestingly enough, I even surprised Dale Bredesen while I was writing Gut Check. We were uncovering why this genetic mutation, the ApoE4 gene, which affects 30% of people, is mischievous in creating Alzheimer's. And one of the things that I discovered while researching Gut Check is that this gene, this mutation, doesn't allow the growth of butyrate producing bacteria in the guts of the people who carry this gene.
Wow. I have a single copy,
yeah. Well, and again, 30% of people don't. So one of the things that I do with all of my ApoE4s is I now start them on butyrate producing bacteria. And you can get them, you can buy them, and they're fairly inexpensive because, we now know that. So butyrate is the holy grail of keeping your brain happy, among other things. And so here was a missing link that gets back again right to Hippocrates, that all disease begins in the gut. And here it comes again. And you go, well, of course, that's he was right again. So that is another piece of this puzzle. Now, the other thing which was so surprising to a lot of people, including me, is we've known that these gut bacteria normally love to eat fiber, soluble fiber. And they can take soluble fiber and eat it and then produce these, what are now called postbiotics. If you want to say bacterial poop, that's fine with me. They make this these postbiotics, among which are these short-chain fatty acids, butyrate.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to have precursors to do this.
Mm-hmm.
But what was fascinating is there's two great researchers at Stanford, the Sonnenberg husband and wife team, they're microbiome experts, and we started this program. They're very depressed that we will never ever get our microbiome back to the way it should be. We should have a teeming tropical rainforest of 10,000 different species, all of which are interconnected. And if you look at the Western people, we're a wasteland. We're a desert in terms of like a hunter-gatherer.
Yeah.
And they're very depressed that we can never get this back. I actually have a little more hope than they do, but they did a great experiment that I think everyone should know about. So they took people and they gave them a lot of prebiotic fiber, soluble fiber, inulin. By the way, inulin's in asparagus, it's in artichokes, it's in radicchio, the chicory family, Belgian endive, good stuff. So they gave it to volunteers, and a lot of it, and they looked at their gut microbiome biodiversity. In other words, the more species in general, the better. The less species, the worse. And then they looked at markers of inflammation. And lo and behold, their species biodiversity didn't improve, and their inflammation markers didn't improve. And I go, well, what the heck? We're feeding all these guys exactly what they need. So then they said, well, let's do the same experiment. Let's give them all this prebiotic fiber, but this other group, we're going to have them eat fermented foods. In this case, it was mostly yogurts and kefirs, but, sauerkraut,
Kimchi.
vinegars, kimchi. So these are fermented foods. And lo and behold, these guys, their gut microbiome biodiversity improved and their inflammation markers went down. Now, why is that? Well, it turns out, as I write about in Gut Check, that these butyrate-producing bacteria can't take this prebiotic fiber and make butyrate. They have to have precursors, other short-chain fatty acids, to do the job. So they have to have acetate, propionate, and then they have to have the fiber, and only with these missing pieces can they make what we're looking for. And it's a great example of, well, son of a gun, back in the good old days, everybody fermented everything because that was the only storage system. Everything rotted. And you look at cultures and, everybody rots everything. And it was really important. The other thing that I think is really important for most people to realize is that our great-great-grandparents ate whole foods, but they ate them whole. And we don't do that anymore. We eat these processed and ultra-processed foods that have been stripped of fiber, number one, doesn't exist. And so we can eat all these, even, quote, healthy foods, and they've been stripped of the things that our gut bacteria have to have. And our gut bacteria are constantly going, what the heck? I can hear you eating up there, but where's my stuff?
Just flying by.
There was a beautiful study out of China that I talked about in the last book. They took people and put them on a 14-day water fast. Nothing to eat but water.
Hardcore.
14-day, long time. There were two groups. One, all they got was water. The other group got 100 calories of prebiotic fiber. Now, we can't digest prebiotic fiber. We can't absorb it. There's no calories for us. But that's what the gut bacteria like.
Mm.
And fascinatingly, you can imagine the folks with the water fast were pretty doggone hungry for a number of days.
Yeah.
And then they got used to it. But the group that got the prebiotic fiber had no hunger from day one.
Wow.
And you go, what? And of course,
Mhm.
the gut bacteria, which actually control your hunger, it's called the gut-centric theory of hunger, said,
Mhm.
hey, we're good. Thanks a lot.
We're sold.
Thanks. Yeah, you sold.
Oh.
You don't have to go looking for anything else. We're happy.
Mhm.
And I and others think that this is actually one of the reasons we all overeat, because our gut bacteria
Mhm.
actually control, our appetite.
Mhm.
And it's like, come on, where is it? It used to be here. Your great grandparents did it. Where is it?
This episode is brought to you by Air Oasis. If you want to start breathing in cleaner indoor air, let me share a product with you that I love called iAdapt Air Purifier by Air Oasis. We breathe 2,000 gallons of air in each day, and poor air quality is linked to many chronic health conditions. iAdapt Air's unique combination of medical grade filters and other technologies reduce airborne and surface-borne contaminants such as mold, pollen, pet dander, viruses, bacteria, smoke, and dust. Check out Air Oasis's iAdapt Air by going to airoasis.com/Claudia today. I love that experiment, and I think for a lot of people with overeating, touching on that, it's that disconnect between, well, probably also the replenishing the good bacteria to make sure that there's enough there to signal it all to the brain, like, hey, I'm hungry, I'm not hungry, I'm full, please stop.
Yeah.
And I think, there must be a strong correlation there. And I'd love to touch on that, actually, the gut brain correlation and access. And you touched also on Alzheimer's and, the health implications of the gut not being repaired. Can you expand a bit on that?
Yeah. Again, I think when you get Dr. Bredesen and I in a room, we both are convinced that leaky mouth and leaky gut lead to leaky brain.
Mm.
And we know that all these tangles and all this amyloid are really a protective mechanism of the brain
Mm-hmm.
against foreign invaders, infectious agents.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that we should develop drugs to break down these
Mm-hmm.
compounds is, at least to the both of us, rather laughable, because these were put there as agents against infection. So you got to go, well, what infections, are threatening the brain?
Mm-hmm.
And we know that there are bodyguards of the neurons in the brain, which are called glial cells or microglial cells, and that's the immune system of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And these bodyguards, if there's mischief down below in the gut, 80% of our immune system actually lines the wall of our gut. 80%.
Wow.
And so if the wall of the gut is being broken, if the hordes are at the gate, then part of what happens is our immune system literally says, oh my gosh, we're under attack.
Mm-hmm.
These guys are loose and they're coming for you, brain, and you got to prepare yourselves. And so the glial cells go, oh my gosh, here they come. I've gotten the message. They're marching. They're coming. What's really scary is, so neurons talk to other neurons via dendritic processes. They grow little axons out to talk to another nerve, and they communicate. It's almost like a lot of airports have a central hub, and they have spokes that go out where the airplanes are. So those spokes are where other neurons talk to us. What happens is, when the glial cells are activated, that mischief is ahead. They literally, and we can film this. I can't, but Harvard
It
can.
can be done, yeah.
They eat these processes, these dendritic
They
processes.
eat
They
them. Wow.
literally, they literally kind of pull everybody back from the periphery to the central fork,
Mm-hmm.
the neuron itself.
Mm-hmm.
And then they pull up the drawbridge so that nothing can get
Wow.
to that neuron.
Uh-huh.
And needless to say, if they eat away these connections,
Mm-hmm.
then it's no wonder that we can't remember things.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can actually, I mean, you can experimentally induce this. And it's like, wow, what are we doing worrying about the brain when it's just responding
Mm-hmm.
to a threat that's recognized down in the gut? Once again, Hippocrates was right. All disease begins in the gut.
Mm-hmm.
Better said, all disease begins in a leaky gut. Now, it's a little more complicated than that because we know that certain bacterial species are viewed as real mischief makers, and they
Mm-hmm.
produce some compounds called LPSs. But so it's
Is that like H. pylori, would you say? Or is there certain...
well, H. pylori is not as bad as people think, but
Okay.
so gram-negative bacteria
Mm-hmm.
have, like E. coli is a gram-negative bacteria.
Okay, sure. Mm-hmm.
Pseudomonas is a gram-negative bacteria. These have cell walls
Mm-hmm.
that, sadly, can get through the wall of our gut by several mechanisms. And they're recognized as foreign
Mm-hmm.
by our immune system.
Mm-hmm.
And the immune system literally reads whether a bacteria is a good guy or a bad guy by reading the barcode on the cell wall.
Mm-hmm.
We have barcode scanners. And the immune system can't tell
Mm-hmm.
by reading the cell wall of a bacteria whether that bacteria is living or dead.
Mm-hmm.
It sees the cell wall and assumes that it's a living bacteria.
Mm-hmm.
Good guess. And if a living bacteria is where it shouldn't be, that should be cause for alarm and sends out inflammatory signals, but also sends these signals to the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we know that people who have elevated markers of lipopolysaccharides, LPSs, in their blood, which we can measure, have a much greater incidence of dementia, have a much greater incidence of heart disease, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So it's Hippocrates is right. Sorry, get over it.
Yeah, 2,500 years. What would you say, Dr. Gundry, are some of the key strategies? And I know it's obviously general and many people have, different intricacies with their gut health, but what are some of the strategies people should be focusing on to keep a healthy gut and maintain it throughout their lifetime?
Well, I think one of the, exciting news is that the more fermented foods you add to your diet, probably the better off you are.
Mm-hmm.
Fermentation has several benefits besides introducing these postbiotics. Fermentation, turns out one of my chapters is dead men tell no tales, but dead bacteria do. And it turns out that most of the benefit of fermented foods is not live bacteria, not probiotics.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time when we eat these things, the bacteria are long dead, or if they're still living, they'll be eaten by our stomach acid and they'll never get to where we want to go.
Mm-hmm.
However, the dead bacteria, their cell wall carries information. And other bacteria read that cell wall and say, for instance, there's a wonderful, really keystone bacteria called Akkermansia mucinophila. And you can buy living Akkermansia, but you can also buy dead Akkermansia. And lo and behold, like I write about in the book, the dead Akkermansia seems to be just about as useful as the living, because the bacteria in our gut, they read this dead bacteria, and they go, "Oh, Akkermansia is in the house. Yeah, it's time to party. Let's, and it's like, wow, this is such a complex system that our ancestors somehow knew. How'd they know to ferment stuff? So a lot of fermented foods. Now, fermented foods are readily available, so you don't have to have sauerkraut every day.
Do you
You
make
don't
your
have
own, or do you purchase?
no.
Okay.
Don't, yeah, you can do it. I don't have the time. I'm seeing patients 6 days
Of
a week.
course, yeah.
But vinegars are fermented foods.
Mhm.
Good news, wine is a fermented food. Champagne actually has a huge number of health benefits, particularly to women.
Oh,
And
the alcohol,
vintage
then what do you think? Does it outweigh?
alcohol. Well, it turns out there's really good human studies showing that
Mhm.
the alcohol plus the fermentation process makes these things work. The
Mm.
same studies have been done in humans using the polyphenols in wine or in just alcohol from like gin, and there's absolutely no benefit. But the combination of the alcohol with these polyphenols
Mhm.
has a profound benefit on improving microbiome biodiversity.
Mm.
And that's what I want in my gut. So, believe it or not, I have a glass of red wine every night, whether I want to or not, for medicinal purposes for my gut microbiome.
I think there's a lot of people listening that are probably very happy to hear you say this.
Now, having said that, if you don't drink, don't start. Please, it's my grandfather was an alcoholic, so I know the risks involved, and
Mhm.
it's never worth that risk. So if you
Sure.
don't drink, don't start.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
The other things, chocolate is a fermented food. Uh, dark tea is a fermented food.
Mhm.
Coffee is a fermented food.
Mhm.
So there's all sorts of easy ways to get fermented foods in our diet that we don't even think are fermented foods.
How particular should one be? So is it only the 90% cacao chocolates? Are there certain tea brands that you say, definitely, and others less so?
Well, yeah. So in general, chocolate, unfortunately, most chocolate has sugar in it, but
Mhm.
the higher the percentage of cacao,
Mhm.
the less sugar.
Mhm.
And so I tend to eat 90%.
Me too.
Uh, most people, it's hard to get them to do that right away. And
Mhm.
so I'll start my patients at 70, 72% and
Mhm.
work them up. And the
Mhm.
nice thing is most people find as sugar is gradually removed from their diet,
Mhm.
these things taste sweeter and sweeter and sweeter.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so it's easy to retrain.
Mhm.
Tea, there's a fermented tea primarily in China, also in Japan, called pu'er tea, and I've written about the benefits of pu'er tea.
Mhm.
And it's the fermentation process that improves. So people who drink pu'er tea, like I've written about in previous books,
Mhm.
have a much more biodiverse microbiome than people who don't drink fermented tea.
Mhm.
And by the way, green tea is not fermented.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, pu'er tea as well. What are some of the advances in science that you're most excited about in your field of specialty?
Well, I think because of the Human Microbiome Project, we've been able to now accurately map what each individual bacteria is capable of doing.
Amazing.
And literally with every week, uh, something, here, I'll give you a little teaser for the next book. We know that uric acid is actually, in a lot of ways, really bad for us. Uric
Mhm.
acid causes gout. Uric acid causes high blood pressure. Uric acid can damage kidneys. And uric acid is very responsible for promoting insulin resistance. So uric acid is not a great thing.
Mhm.
And uric acid, kidney stones are a real thing.
Mhm.
And so it's not a great thing to have. Recently, a bacteria was discovered that normally, when most people know that you can't really eat raw olives. Olives have to be fermented, they have to be brined. And in the process of brining olives, there's a bacteria that coats olives that grows, thrives in this medium. And this particular bacteria loves to eat uric acid. Just think it's the best, tastiest stuff.
Wow.
And this bacteria actually fosters more biodiversity of the gut microbiome. And it turns out that this same bacteria is in pickle juice. Now, you go back to old wives' tales and, pickle juice, drinking pickle juice cures you of X and Y and Z. Well, we now know that, okay, it wasn't so much that olives were good for you. It was the fact that these olives were carrying a bacteria that is really useful for eating uric acid.
Wow.
And it's the same with pickle juice. So we're just constantly finding that, there's this, wow. And the reason I'm mentioning this is there is a company in the UK that now sells this particular bacteria as a probiotic. And mine arrived yesterday. So I'm going, now I don't have a uric acid problem, but what the heck? If this guy's going to give me more biodiversity, then I'm all for it.
Sounds great. Are you okay to share the name or?
It's called, actually, I'll tell you real quick. It'll take a second.
Kidney stones, no problem. While you look there, I've had David Perlmutter, who you mentioned also before on the podcast, and he wrote the book Drop Acid, right, which is all about the uric acid. And he heard originally of the idea because of the interview with Peter Attia and Dr. Richard Johnson, and Rich Johnson's been on twice as well. Also,
yeah, we've become friends as well.
He's lovely. Yeah, I mean, they're great. It's nice. It becomes one big happy family at one point, right? Which is wonderful. But how exciting that this is actually a workaround because to solve also the kidney stone and the higher uric acid levels. My cousin's husband was suffering with kidney stones. I haven't had them, thankfully, but it sounds very painful. So if there is a wonderful probiotic that helps with that, then
Epigenetics.
Epigenetics is the name of the company.
It's the name of the company.
Simply ingenious.
It's a UK. Yeah, it's a UK bit. It's based in where is it based? Pusey, Wiltshire.
Wiltshire, in the countryside.
Yeah. In the countryside,
outside of London. Beautiful. And the name of because people listening might be very curious as well. That's the actual product name, or is that the company?
That's the product name is, one second, Lactobacillus pentosus.
Lactobacillus pentosus.
Pentosus.
Got it.
Hot off the press. Brand new information.
Everyone listening, they should give them a heads up. This their product might sell out sooner than later.
Sorry about that. That's happened to me before when I mention a product.
But
I have no relationship, folks. And
yeah.
I'm not an influencer of this. They didn't pay me to tell them. I actually paid them money to try this. So
to try it as well. And I think it's so that's one of the things you were saying is so exciting. The research that is coming out around, you were saying, with the olives and the pickle juice and the ability to reduce the uric acid levels. What else is keeping you up with excitement?
Well, I think the other thing that is very exciting to me is that I mentioned this. Well, I wrote a whole chapter about it in Gut Check, that we have been really naive about how much single cell organisms can get a complex multicellular organism like a human being to do their bidding. And it really bothers people that, we're the greatest example of an animal ever, and, have the greatest brain, and that a single cell organism can completely take control of our behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And in my next book, it turns out that the microbiome is the puppet master, and we are merely the puppet.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to get over it. And we need to know. So, for instance, all addictive behavior
Mm-hmm.
is actually driven by the microbiome.
Mm-hmm.
And it is fascinating
Mm-hmm.
to realize that once you understand that these guys are pulling the strings,
Mm-hmm.
that actually gives you hope that
Mm-hmm.
if we manipulate them
Mm-hmm.
by changing our foods, by introducing bacteria that are good guys rather than bad guys, driving the bad guys out by literally starving them to death,
Mm-hmm.
then you can change some of what we would assume were horrible psychological issues. And I wrote about that in Gut Check. We know
Mm-hmm.
that depression and anxiety is directly related to dysbiotic microbiome and leaky gut. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you fix that,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the fun things is it looks like most SSRI antidepressants work
Mm-hmm.
by changing the microbiome, not by doing silly stuff in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
So
Interesting.
I think that's what's really exciting, that we're really beginning to understand who's been pulling the strings. And for good reason, there's a lot more of those guys than there are us.
Yeah, they're the puppet masters, but I think it, as you said, it's exciting because it empowers us to understand that and then take action to
Yeah,
replenish and to take back the driver's seat and control who the drivers in the car are
right.
potentially as well. Beautiful. Um, where can people, as we finish up today, where can people find out more about what you're up to, what's coming? Do you have a website you'd like to point people to, social media?
Sure, I've got 2 YouTube channels. I've got the Dr. Gundry
Mhm.
podcast. I've got Instagram accounts that you can find.
Mhm.
drgundry.com
Mhm.
is one of my sites. GundryMD.com is my supplement and food company.
Mhm.
That's actually where I am on the 7th day. So I see patients 6 days a week, and I'm at Gundry MD on the 7th day.
So I have to ask, despite us finishing up here, how do you keep up your energy levels to such a high level? And what are some of your key routines to thrive 7 days a week?
Well, number one, I get to see miracles every day,
Mm,
and I'll soon turn 74,
amazing.
and I literally see patients 6 days a week, work 7 days a week. So, you literally get to see people transform their
Mhm.
lives and go from a hopeless situation to feeling normal. So many of my patients will say, I forgot what feeling normal feels like.
Yeah,
Um,
what a
I
gift.
thought, and it's, well, why wouldn't I get up? I'm a kid in the candy store. Bad example. Um, Bad example. But I try my best to feed these gut buddies, as I call them, what they
Mhm.
want to eat,
Mhm.
and they seem to power my mitochondria because, again, the sisterhood is talking to their sisters, and I want them to tell the mitochondria, hey, make a lot of energy.
What does a day in the life of what you consume look like? I'm curious.
Everybody wants to know. Um, well, so I'm actually having Vital Reds, one of my first formula, Gundry MD, which is
Mhm.
just a ton of polyphenols, but we won't go into that. From January through June every year
Mhm.
for the last 23 years, I don't eat breakfast and I don't eat lunch.
Mm-hmm.
I eat all my calories between 5 and 7 o'clock at night.
Mm-hmm.
So I do an OMAD, one meal a day.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been doing that now for 23 years. As far as I know, and nobody's refuted me, I'm the first person to write about intermittent fasting in the early 2000s in a book. So that's what I do. So I don't eat during that time. Do I get hungry? Not at all. Does it improve?
Do you drink fermented drinks or anything during that time?
I drink tea. I drink tea throughout the day.
Okay.
And in fact, if you actually saw, well, I'll have tea after this. If you actually saw my teacup, it's monstrous. And I actually have 8 different bags of tea sitting in my teacup. And I won't go into the.
Oh, please tell me why eight bags, just out of curiosity. I know we're finishing up here now, but why 8?
Well, because I want these primarily polyphenols extracted by hot water to,
wow.
Each of them has an effect.
Mm-hmm.
During the summer and fall, I go back to eating 2 meals a day. I always do intermittent fasting.
Mm-hmm.
I purposely try to gain 10 to 15 pounds every summer and fall.
Mm-hmm.
And then I purposely take it off during the winter and spring. And people go, what the heck? That's really stupid. What are you doing that for? Well, yeah, as David Perlmutter would tell you, and I would tell you, we inherited a mutation from great apes that allowed them to take advantage of fruit to store fat for the winter. And it allowed them actually to take over the world. And we inherited that genetic mutation and were designed to become fat for the winter because during the winter there wasn't really any food. Yeah. And so I'm doing my best to cycle how I think that we were designed. The other thing that's very clear from watching hunter-gatherers is they have a plentiful season and they have a horrible season, and their gut microbiome shifts dramatically during that time. And who's to say which of those microbiomes are important? But I would say if that was our design over millions of years, that perhaps I should try to duplicate that design with how I cycle access to food. And, we'll see, so it's like, falling out of a 100-story window. So, so far, so good on the way down.
I think you're on a somewhat safer path, though, it feels. Thankfully. But really such a role model in many regards and really so grateful for your work. I wanted to ask you if you have any final ask or recommendation or any parting thoughts or message for my audience today.
Well, I think the message I got to know the godfather of fitness, Jack LaLanne, his later years. And Jack used to say, and my people tell me, don't ever say this, if it tastes good, spit it out. Now, that's not actually what he meant. What he meant was, don't be influenced by this 2-by-3-inch piece of muscle, your tongue. Eat for them. The more you consciously eat for the guys waiting for their meal, which is your gut microbiome, and give them what they want, they will take care of you because you are their home. And they want to be good tenants. So you got to be a good landlord. And really, if you take care of them with what you eat, you'll do fine. I mean, I'm about to turn 74. I'm on no medications. My wife and I hike 10, 12 miles in the mountains of Italy on a routine basis.
Beautiful.
And so it's like, so far, so good.
Well, definitely a role model. And thank you so much for your work and that you're 7 days a week continuing to work and bringing out new books all the time and inspiring the world. So grateful for you. Thank you so much and for coming on and for everybody listening and tuning in today as well. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Claudia. Appreciate it.